Frank Winfield Woolworth, you might recognise that middle name, opened his first British Woolworth store in November 1909 in Liverpool. By then, the brand was already well established in America after starting off with a single shop in Pennsylvania in 1879. This fella certainly knew what he was doing. In this video, we're going to look at the huge success they made of their UK venture. But as they say, all good things must come to an end. As you might have noticed from the current lack of Woolworths shops on your local high street, they didn't quite make it to the full 100-year mark. The last stores closed in January 2009. On the outside, many branches sported that iconic tiled Art Deco frontage, almost always in prime high street locations. And inside, who doesn't remember the bright colours of the pick and mix counter, and gazing at the picture covers of the latest top 20 singles and LPs? When journalists finally had the task of writing obituaries for Woolworths, they almost all mentioned the sweets first. Everybody loved Woolworths. They sold everything. Well, almost. And they traded on that reputation. Looking for something? Anything? Try Woolies first. F.W. Woolworth pioneered the 5 and dime business model in the USA, and when he brought that ethos to the British Isles, they quickly replicated the success they'd had across the Atlantic. That first store on Merseyside was a big success, and rapid expansion followed. By the start of the so-called War to End All Wars, the First World War, they boasted around 40 stores in Great Britain and Ireland. By the early years of the Roaring Twenties, they were up to 130 shops. Pretty impressive, but they had barely started. The 400th branch opened in 1930, and in 1931 the company floated on the London Stock Exchange. Just 3 years later, they threw open the doors of store number 600. There was another war, of course, and despite post-war austerity, there was no stopping good old Woolworths. In 1953, the 800th store opened. You'd think they'd start slowing down a bit now, eh? Well, no. It only took them until 1958 to reach the mighty 1,000 mark. They eventually peaked at around 1,141 shops in the late 1960s, before dropping back a little to roughly 1,000 stores by 1982. During those post-war decades, Woolies really embedded itself in British culture. In the 1950s and 60s, they even operated their own Embassy Records label, releasing cheap cover versions of hit songs sold only in Woolworths. They remained one of the UK's biggest music retailers well into the 1990s, shifting mountains of vinyl singles and albums, cassettes and later CDs. We had a great Woolworths in my city, a huge ground floor, a cafeteria on the first floor, and even more sales space up there as well. In the early 80s, the first floor was where they showed off all the emerging home computers like the ZX Spectrum and early consoles such as the ColecoVision. I have such a vivid memory of everyone crowding round, trying to get past that first level on Manic Miner, or finish the first screen of Donkey Kong on the ColecoVision. I remember buying Lego there as well as a youngster. Woolies was always there, right through my childhood, my teenage years and beyond. We thought it would always be around. In 1982, the British Woolworths chain was sold by the US parent and acquired, along with DIY chain B&Q, by Paternoster Stores Limited, which later became Kingfisher plc. Under Kingfisher, Woolworths was pushed to modernise. Product lines were condensed into 4 main categories: entertainment, home, children's toys and clothing, and confectionery. At the same time, those newfangled out-of-town retail parks were sucking shoppers away from traditional high streets, and that affected more than Woolworths, of course. There were various experiments with formats, including Woolco in the 1960s to 80s, and later Big W, a kind of out-of-town hypermarket version of Woolworths, launched in 1998 and dropped by 2004. Competition was ramping up. Supermarkets were expanding into toys, homeware and entertainment with enough muscle to beat Woolworths on price. Further competition came from others such as the Wilkinson chain, which had a similar vibe to Woolworths. Specialist retailers also ate into Woolworths' bottom line, challenging Woolworths in key departments like toys and music. Toys R Us, HMV and others all wanted a slice of the action. Woolworths' distribution arm, Entertainment UK, supplied CDs, DVDs and games to Woolworths and other retailers, but it coped badly with the shift to a changing market, first downloads and then streaming. They tried their hand at the budget end of the market with the launch of the Worth It value range in 2007. Most people remember their own brand Winfield, but they also had their Ladybird children's clothing line and the Chad Valley kids' toys range. In the early 2000s, Kingfisher demerged Woolworths into a separate listed company, Woolworth Group plc, which began trading on the London Stock Exchange in August 2003. But from the early 2000s onwards, the seeds of trouble were already planted and Woolworths struggled with a cocktail of problems. Retail analysts later argued that Woolworths became stuck in the middle, not as cheap as the discounters, not as stylish as the specialists, and not as convenient or comprehensive as the supermarkets. Many branches felt old-fashioned, cluttered layouts, dated fixtures, and a general jumble sale vibe. That had a certain charm, but in the age of bright Tesco extras and shiny malls, it looked increasingly second-rate. Those prized high street locations also came with high running costs. The Woolworths Museum website later argued that complex corporate manoeuvres and decisions going back to the Kingfisher era left the new Woolworths Group saddled with heavy obligations and limited room to manoeuvre. Woolies was relatively late to truly embrace the internet age. It did have a website, but it never seemed to be people's first destination. It never became a core part of the brand in the way, say, Argos managed. Few could have forecast just how quickly the end would come. Their rapid rise would be mirrored by a quick collapse following the 2008 financial crisis. By 2008, Woolworth was loss-making and heavily in debt. In July, the board rejected a bid from Malcolm Walker, founder of Iceland, to buy the 819 stores for £50 million without taking on the group's debts and pension liabilities. New chief executive Steve Johnson arrived in August 2008 and proposed a turnaround plan. Sell around 15% of the shops, cut ranges, trim the web operation and reduce head office costs. But time was running out, and so was the patience of their bankers. They called in their loans, forcing Woolworths into administration with around £385 million of debt. On the 26th of November 2008, trading in Woolworths shares was suspended and administrators from Deloitte were appointed to Woolworths and Entertainment UK. A huge closing down sale started in December, initially with modest discounts, then increasingly drastic reductions as administrators scrambled to clear stock. It led to a bittersweet day on the 5th of December 2008 when they banked record takings of around £27 million in a single day. Later that month, it was announced that all 807 stores were to be closed by early January. 27,000 jobs gone. It took little more than a month for nearly 100 years of history to disappear. The end had come, and nothing could be done to save the parent company either, which also entered administration in 2009. Maybe there was some hope that something could be salvaged. Shop Direct, which later became Very, bought the brand name and website in 2009, but closed it down in 2015 and folded it into the Very brand. So what became of those iconic stores? Iceland, the frozen food specialists, not the country, took over about 50. Many others were taken over by household names such as Next and Poundland. Many more stood empty for years. Others were demolished. The locals will know that used to be Woolworths, but over time even those who remember will dwindle. The trademarks today are owned by Woolworths GmbH in Germany, where a separate Woolworth chain still operates, a reminder that the brand's story is global, even if the British chapter has ended. But it can never be the same, can it? The high street favourite still lives on in some small ways. There are thriving Facebook groups for former staff and customers to reminisce. I'll leave some links in the description if you want to dig deeper. And there will be some links on screen around about now to a couple of my other videos as recommended by YouTube. Watching them and subscribing is the #1 way to help me grow the channel, and it really is much appreciated. Let everyone know in the comments your Woolworths memories.